Hi, my name is Dan Castle. I'm a current student in organizational dynamics at the University of Pennsylvania. While I've spent the last 20 plus years in information technology, as a younger man going through college, I spent 6 years as an emergency medical technician. The role of an EMT can easily be described as one who tries to bring order to chaos. There are several lessons I learned during the 6 years I did that job, and I'd like to share several of them with you today. As I think about my time in EMS, several calls come back to me more readily than others. The first one I think about was one of the first calls I ever participated on. At the age of 18 or 19, I was the third person on an ambulance. That ambulance came upon an overturned vehicle at about 2:30 in the morning. Even though I was trained and I had a certification, I was a little bit shell-shocked at what I was about to see and how I was about to deal with the scenario. It was an overturned car in the middle of the highway with 3 passengers having been ejected. One passenger, an older man, was in fairly grave condition. Significantly injured by the ejection, he was splayed out in the middle of the street. Not so badly hurt were what I presumed to be the man's wife and daughter. They were sitting on the curb, barely scratched up. While having to treat the man for his injuries, I also had to be mindful and be aware of the other 2 passengers from that vehicle and treat them as well as the man who was injured. I think that sense of compassion was something I learned as a young adult, and to me is one of the better lessons of my time in emergency medical services. As I continued to progress in my career, I managed to work in a more difficult area for a hospital. One of the scenes I recall very vividly was being called to the scene of a shooting. Upon arrival of the scene, several emergency vehicles were already there, other ambulances, police officers, emergency services, etc. In the middle of the street was a man, probably in his 20s, who lay bleeding, a gunshot to his chest. I distinctly remember coming upon this scene as it didn't look real to me. You study these types of things in school, you see them in the movies, you even hear about them on the news, but when you're thrust into the middle of it, it really is a difficult scenario to deal with. What happened next I never expected. As I was tending to the man who was injured, a very significant injury I would add, I began to become accosted by those in the crowd. That may sound strange to you, but when you think about the fact that I was probably helping someone else that was the target of someone else's hatred and malice, I now became sort of a secondary target for that individual. While treating the man with the gunshot wound, I was very much aware of what was happening around me. And it's very difficult to stay focused in those times, but extremely important. It's also very difficult to remain compassionate. These are human beings at the end of the day. And one of the challenges I have found with dealing in emergency services is professionals oftentimes can lose sight of that. And it's not meant to be derogatory, but it's very easy to lose sight of that when you're surrounded by that type of challenge on a regular basis. The final story I recall that I'd like to share with you has to do with a victim of cardiac arrest. I was in this situation several times in the course of 6 years where I had to perform CPR on a victim. Sometimes CPR is effective and sometimes it's not. And it's very difficult to watch someone die in front of you. But the lesson it taught me then, and I think the lesson that's still relevant for me today, is despite your best efforts, sometimes it's just not enough. If you remain focused and remain vigilant on keeping your skills sharp and doing the right thing, that's never going to guarantee an outcome. And again, a difficult life lesson to learn, but one I was fortunate enough to learn early in my career and early in my life, and has had several positive outcomes for me as I've become a leader of teams and a leader of men and women over the last 2 decades. So those are my stories around organizational dynamics. I thank you for taking the time to listen to them, and I hope that at some point they can be beneficial to you throughout your career. Thank you.